What makes a DJ who has shared the stage with hundreds of artists, from global pop stars to underground legends, suddenly stop everything just to talk about one group? Steve Aoki has been in the music industry for over 2 decades. He's built a career on relentless touring, genre-bending production, and a reputation for being one of the hardest-working figures in electronic music. He's worked with names that most producers would dream of standing next to. And yet, when it comes to one particular collaboration, Aoki didn't just praise the music, he pulled back the curtain on something the public was never meant to see. The group? BTS. But this isn't about chart numbers or sold-out stadiums. This is about what happened when the cameras were off, when the studio lights dimmed, and when the real work began. The moments that even the most dedicated fans rarely get access to. For years, bits and pieces of this story surfaced in interviews and passing comments, but the full picture never came together. Why did Steve Aoki feel so compelled to speak up? What did he witness behind those studio doors that made him break the unwritten code of keeping private sessions private? And more importantly, what does it say about BTS that one of the biggest names in the DJ world decided the world needed to hear this? The answers are layered, and they start now.
Number 7. The unstoppable energy that never faked it. J-Hope. In the world of electronic music, Steve Aoki has seen every kind of artist walk through his studio doors. He's worked with performers who bring nothing but ego, producers who phone it in after the first take, and singers who treat collaboration like a chore they need to finish before heading to the after-party. After 20-plus years in the game, very little surprises him anymore. But when he first stepped into a working session with BTS, there was one member's presence in the room that registered differently from the very first minute, and that was Jungkook, known to the world as J-Hope. Now, here's the thing about J-Hope that most people think they understand, but actually don't. The public knows him as the group's main dancer, the guy with the infectious smile, the one who keeps the mood light when things get heavy. And all of that is true, but what Steve Aoki encountered in the studio wasn't the sunshine persona that fans see on camera. What he saw was a man who treated every single second of studio time like it was borrowed, like someone was going to take it away from him if he didn't use it right. Aoki has talked in interviews about how most artists, even the great ones, have a warm-up phase. They walk in, they settle, they chat, they ease into the work. It's normal. It's human. But J-Hope didn't operate that way. According to what Aoki has shared, J-Hope was already locked in before the session officially started. While others were still getting comfortable, adjusting headphones, checking their phones one last time, J-Hope was already listening to reference tracks, already humming melodic ideas, already moving his body to internalize the rhythm of whatever beat was being built. It wasn't nervous energy. It wasn't the frantic pacing of someone who doesn't know what to do with themselves. It was precision wrapped in enthusiasm, the kind of readiness that only comes from someone who has trained themselves to flip the switch instantly. And this is where it gets deeper. Steve Aoki has worked with some of the most disciplined artists in the business. He's collaborated with people who treat their craft with military-level seriousness. But what made J-Hope different, according to Aoki, was that his discipline never killed the joy. In most professional settings, there's a trade-off. The more serious you get, the more the room tenses up. The more focused the work becomes, the less fun it feels. J-Hope broke that pattern completely. He brought the kind of energy that made everyone in the room want to work harder, not because he demanded it, not because he said anything about it, but because his attitude was contagious. When someone is that prepared and that positive at the same time, it shifts the entire dynamic of the room. Engineers work faster, producers try bolder ideas. The whole session moves at a higher frequency. Aoki noticed something else that stuck with him. In the studio, especially during collaborative sessions where multiple artists are contributing ideas, there's always a moment where someone has to step back. Not every idea makes the cut. Not every vocal take gets used. Not every creative suggestion lands. For a lot of artists, that moment, the moment their idea gets passed over, is where the professionalism cracks. Egos flare, energy drops, the vibe shifts. But J-Hope handled those moments with a level of grace that Aoki said he rarely sees. When an idea didn't work, J-Hope didn't withdraw. He didn't sulk. He didn't go quiet. He immediately pivoted, offered something else, or threw his energy behind whatever direction the session was heading. That kind of adaptability isn't something you can fake. It comes from a deep understanding that the final product matters more than any individual contribution. And that's a mindset that separates professionals from performers. There's another layer to this that often gets overlooked. J-Hope's background is rooted in street dance and underground performance culture, a world where you don't get second chances, where you perform in real time with no safety net, and where your reputation is built on consistency, not one lucky moment. That foundation shaped how he approaches everything, including studio work. Aoki picked up on it quickly.
We noticed that J-Hope didn't just bring vocal ideas to the table. He brought rhythmic ideas, structural suggestions, and an instinct for how a track should feel physically, not just sonically, but physically. As in, how would this sound translate to a live stage? How would a crowd move to this? Where does the energy peak, and where does it need to breathe? That kind of thinking is rare among vocalists. Most singers focus on melody and lyrics. J-Hope was thinking about the architecture of the experience, and that's a producer's mindset living inside a performer's body. Aoki also pointed out that J-Hope's stamina was unlike anything he'd encountered in a studio setting. Sessions can run long, sometimes 8, 10, 12 hours. Most artists hit a wall around the 5-hour mark. Their energy dips, their focus scatters, and the quality of their output starts to decline. J-Hope maintained the same intensity at hour 10 that he brought at hour 1. And it wasn't caffeine-fueled desperation. It was genuine, sustainable energy, the kind that comes from someone who has conditioned themselves physically and mentally to endure. Aoki, a man known for his own relentless touring schedule and non-stop work ethic, recognized that quality immediately because he lives it himself. And to see it mirrored in someone from a completely different corner of the music industry, not a DJ, not a producer, but a member of a 7-piece act from South Korea, gave him a new level of respect for what BTS had built as a unit. What's perhaps most telling about J-Hope's professionalism is what he did after the sessions ended. Most artists wrap up, say their goodbyes, and move on to the next thing. J-Hope followed up. He sent messages checking on the progress of the track. He asked about mix details. He wanted to know if there was anything else he could contribute. That kind of post-session engagement is something Aoki associates with veteran producers, not young artists in the middle of a world tour with 1,000 other obligations pulling at their time. It signaled to Aoki that for J-Hope, the collaboration wasn't just a line on a track list, it was something personal, something he cared about beyond the transactional nature of the music business. And this is just the beginning, because if J-Hope's studio presence set the foundation for what Steve Aoki experienced with BTS, what comes next reveals a side of the group that even Aoki didn't expect when he first agreed to work with them. And it involves a member whose quiet professionalism almost went completely unnoticed. Number 6. The quiet authority that held everything together. Jin. Every group has a hierarchy, whether they admit it or not. In most cases, especially in the world of K-pop where age and seniority carry significant weight, the eldest member often operates with a visible authority, leading conversations, making final calls, and positioning themselves at the center of every interaction. Steve Aoki walked into his first session with BTS expecting exactly that dynamic. What he found instead was something that fundamentally changed how he understood leadership in a group setting. Kim Seokyeon, Jin, is the oldest member of BTS. In Korean culture, that comes with a built-in expectation of deference from the younger members. The eldest speaks, the others listen. The eldest sets the tone, the others follow. It's not a rule anyone writes down, it's woven into the social fabric. And in a 7-member group navigating the pressure of international collaboration with one of the biggest DJs on the planet, you'd expect that dynamic to be amplified. But Jin didn't play that card, not once. Aoki noticed it almost immediately, and it confused him at first. Here was the eldest member of one of the biggest acts in the world, sitting in a studio session with a global collaborator, and instead of positioning himself at the front, Jin was doing something that most people in his position would never consider. He was making space. Not shrinking, not hiding, making space. There's a critical difference. Shrinking is what people do when they're insecure. Making space is what people do when they're secure enough in their own value that they don't need to perform it for the room. Jin understood that the studio session wasn't about establishing rank, it was about making the best possible track. And sometimes that means stepping back so the right voice, the right idea, the right instinct can step forward. Aoki found this disorienting at first because it ran counter to everything he'd experienced in Western music culture, where seniority usually translates to volume. The loudest voice wins, the biggest name dominates. Jin operated on a completely different frequency. He listened more than he spoke. He observed the flow of the session before inserting himself into it. And when he did contribute, his input was precise, considered, and almost always aimed at improving what someone else had started, rather than redirecting attention toward himself. That's not passivity, that's emotional intelligence operating at a level that most artists never develop, regardless of how long they've been in the industry. But here's where the story takes a turn that Aoki didn't see coming. Because while Jin was quietly making space for others during the creative process, he was simultaneously holding the group together in ways that weren't visible on the surface. Aoki started noticing small things, the kind of details you only catch when you've spent enough time in a room with people to read the unspoken dynamics. When a younger member seemed frustrated with a take that wasn't landing, Jin was the first to offer a quiet word of encouragement, not a grand speech, not a motivational monologue, just a hand on the shoulder, a quick joke to break the tension, a subtle redirection of energy that kept the session from stalling. When the room got too intense, too focused, too wound up in the pursuit of perfection, Jin was the one who knew exactly when to crack a joke that let everyone exhale. And it wasn't random humor, it was surgical. He knew the exact moment the pressure needed a release valve, and he provided it with a timing that Aoki compared to the instincts of a seasoned stage performer, someone who reads an audience not with their eyes, but with their gut. Aoki has spoken about how this quality is almost non-existent in his usual collaborative circles. In the DJ and electronic music world, studio sessions tend to be compartmentalized. The producer works on the beat, the vocalist comes in, records their part, and leaves. The engineer handles the technical side. Everyone stays in their lane. But Jin didn't operate in lanes. He operated in the spaces between lanes, the connective tissue that held the entire session together without anyone explicitly asking him to. And that, according to Aoki, is the hardest role in any group. It's easy to be the star. It's easy to be the loudest, the most talented, the most visible. What's hard is being the person who makes sure everyone else can do their best work and doing it so seamlessly that no one even realizes it's happening. There's another dimension to Jin's professionalism that Aoki touched on, and it's one that rarely gets discussed in the context of BTS's collaborative work. Jin's vocal preparation for the studio sessions was meticulous in a way that caught the production team off guard. Before stepping into the booth, Jin had already done extensive work on his own, studying the track's structure, mapping out where his voice would sit in the mix, identifying the emotional register each section needed. He didn't walk in cold and figure it out in real time. He came prepared with options, multiple vocal approaches for the same section, different emotional textures he could apply depending on what the producer wanted. That level of preparation is something Aoki associates with artists who have spent decades refining their craft, not someone who's often publicly self-deprecating about his own vocal abilities. And that contrast between how Jin talks about himself and how Jin actually works is something that stuck with Aoki long after the sessions were over. It revealed a humility that wasn't performed for cameras or interviews. It was real, baked into his character, and it informed every decision he made in the studio. He never oversold his contributions. He never demanded more time at the microphone. He never positioned himself as the vocal centerpiece of the track. Instead, he focused on making sure that whatever he added complemented the whole, that his voice served the song, not the other way around. Aoki also recalled a specific moment that crystallized everything he'd been observing about Jin. During a long session, when fatigue was starting to creep into the room and the usual signs of a group losing steam were showing, shorter responses, less enthusiasm, more silence between takes, Jin did something unexpected. He organized the room, not in a managerial, clipboard-holding way, but in a natural, almost parental way. He made sure everyone had water. He asked the engineers if they needed a break. He checked in with the younger members individually, not as a formality, but as a genuine welfare check. And he did all of this without breaking the workflow, without making it feel like a pause or an interruption. It was folded into the rhythm of the session so naturally that Aoki only realized what had happened in hindsight. That kind of care, the kind that operates in the background, that never asks for credit, that never shows up in the final product, but absolutely shapes the conditions under which the final product is made, is what separates a group that works together from a group that lasts together. Aoki understood that Jin wasn't just the oldest member of BTS, he was the structural integrity of the group, the person whose professionalism wasn't measured in vocal runs or stage presence, but in the invisible labor of keeping 7 people aligned, motivated, and functioning at their highest level during the most high-pressure moments of their career. And if Jin's quiet authority was the glue that held the room together, what Aoki discovered about the next member on this list shattered every assumption he had about what a performer is capable of behind the mixing board. Because this one didn't just show up to sing.
Number 5. The Translator of Creative Vision, RM. When Steve Aoki prepares for a collaboration with an international act, he is usually bracing himself for a logistical hurdle that most Western producers rarely have to think about. The language barrier is the most obvious obstacle, but the real challenge is the translation of creative intent. In music, a translator can tell you what a word means, but they cannot translate the vibe, the sonic texture, or the emotional weight of a bass line. You lose something in transition. The momentum slows down, the energy in the room cools, and the spontaneous sparks that define great studio sessions get snuffed out by the constant need for interpretation. Aoki expected this to be the case when he first sat down with BTS. He had his team ready, expecting to work through intermediaries to get his production notes across to the group. But the moment Kim Namjoon, known to the world as RM, sat down at the console, that entire worry vanished. RM didn't just speak English. He spoke the language of the studio. Aoki was immediately struck by how RM bypassed the typical translator setup and began discussing the track's structure using the precise terminology of an experienced producer. He wasn't just representing his group, he was translating the raw, abstract ideas in Aoki's head into actionable directives for his bandmates. If Aoki suggested a shift in the track's dynamics, RM didn't just nod politely. He analyzed it, discussed how it would impact the vocal arrangement, and then communicated it to the others in a way that kept the creative energy flowing without a single second of lag. This level of cross-cultural communication is incredibly rare, even among veteran artists who have traveled the world for decades. RM possessed an intuitive understanding of both the Eastern and Western music landscapes, allowing him to act as a cultural bridge that made the collaboration feel seamless. Aoki noticed that RM's leadership wasn't about control or dominance, it was about facilitation. He wasn't dictating how the other members should perform, but rather creating the optimal conditions for them to succeed. In the studio, RM acted as a buffer, absorbing the external pressures and logistical distractions so that the rest of the group could focus entirely on their performance. Aoki watched him manage the delicate balance between being a peer to his members and being the designated leader who had to make the hard decisions. There was a specific moment during the recording of their collaborative work where the track's pacing needed adjustment. The original flow of the Korean verses didn't quite lock into the heavier, more aggressive beat that Aoki was constructing. Instead of pushing back or letting the session stall, RM took the initiative. He sat in the corner of the control room, hunched over his notebook, completely tuning out the noise around him. While the engineers adjusted the mix, RM was rewriting and restructuring his verses in real time, adapting the complex Korean rhythmic patterns to fit the new sonic landscape. Aoki watched him work in silence, marveling at the speed and precision of his writing process. Within 20 minutes, RM had not only rewritten his own parts, but had also sketched out suggestions for how the other rappers could adjust their delivery to match the new tempo. When he stepped back into the vocal booth, the difference was night and day. The flow was tighter, the delivery was sharper, and the track instantly clicked. It was a masterclass in professional adaptability. But RM's contribution went far beyond just writing verses. He was deeply involved in the overall mixing process, offering feedback on the track's equalization, the placement of the vocals in the stereo field, and the overall balance of the instrumentation. Aoki was impressed by RM's ear for detail, noting that he could identify subtle frequencies and panning choices that most vocalists would completely overlook. He wasn't just content to lay down his vocals and leave the rest to the production team. He wanted to ensure that the final mix reflected the group's artistic identity while still retaining Aoki's signature electronic energy. This collaborative spirit, free of the ego clashes that often plague high-profile crossovers, created a sense of mutual respect that defined the entire project. RM's professionalism also manifested in how he handled the intense scrutiny and expectations surrounding the collaboration. He was acutely aware of the global impact this track would have, yet he never let the pressure paralyze his creativity. Instead, he channeled that pressure into a hyper-focused work ethic that set the tone for everyone else in the room. Aoki recalled how RM's calm demeanor acted as an anchor for the session. Even when deadlines were tight and the pressure was mounting, RM remained composed, polite, and thoroughly professional. He treated everyone in the studio, from the head producers to the assistant engineers, with the same level of respect, creating an egalitarian environment where everyone felt valued. This lack of pretension was refreshing for Aoki, who had seen his share of artists behave like royalty once they reached a certain level of fame. RM's humility was genuine, rooted in a deep respect for the craft of music making rather than a calculated public relations strategy. After the recording sessions were completed, RM's involvement didn't stop. He remained in constant communication with Aoki, reviewing mixes, suggesting minor tweaks, and discussing the rollout strategy for the track. He was committed to the project's success at every stage, demonstrating a level of dedication that went far beyond his duties as a performer. For Aoki, this was the ultimate validation of BTS's success. It wasn't just luck or marketing that had propelled them to the top of the global music industry. It was the sheer force of their work ethic, spearheaded by a leader who understood the business, the technology, and the art of music on a profound level. RM's ability to navigate these complex dynamics with ease was what made the collaboration not just successful, but historically significant. He proved that music could transcend language and cultural barriers when guided by a clear vision and a commitment to professional excellence. Aoki's experience with RM redefined his understanding of what a group leader could be, showing him that true leadership is about elevating others and bridging divides. Beyond the linguistics, RM also brought an encyclopedic knowledge of hip-hop and electronic music history to the table, allowing him to connect with Aoki on an intellectual level that few pop stars could match. They discussed the evolution of breaks, the transition of underground synth sounds into mainstream pop, and how the rhythmic structure of modern trap music could be fused with house tempos. This wasn't superficial small talk designed to pass the time. It was a deep, academic exchange of musical philosophies. Aoki realized that RM wasn't just executing a contract. He was studying the project, looking for ways to expand his own creative boundaries while pushing Aoki's production in new directions. During the vocal layering process, RM showed an incredible sensitivity to the phonetic properties of different languages. He worked with the group's vocalists to ensure that their pronunciation of English words retained the necessary hard consonants to punch through a heavy EDM mix, while ensuring that the Korean lyrics maintained their natural flow and emotional resonance. He understood that a vocal line in an electronic track doesn't just convey semantic meaning, it functions as a rhythmic instrument that must cut through a dense wall of synthesizers and percussion. This attention to detail ensured that every vocal element was optimized for the final mix. Furthermore, RM's ability to coordinate the internal dynamics of the group during the session was a marvel to watch. He knew exactly when to encourage a member who was struggling with a challenging line, when to suggest a break, and when to push for one more take to get it perfect. He managed these interactions with a quiet authority that never felt overbearing, maintaining a positive and productive atmosphere throughout the long hours. Aoki observed that the members trusted RM implicitly, relying on his guidance and translation to navigate the unfamiliar territory of a global collaboration. This trust was the foundation of the group's cohesion, allowing them to work as a single, unified entity even under the intense pressure of the studio environment. RM's professionalism extended to the post-production phase, where he continued to offer constructive feedback on the mixes. He wasn't afraid to ask for revisions if he felt the balance wasn't right, but he always framed his suggestions in a respectful and collaborative manner, demonstrating his commitment to achieving the best possible outcome for the track. His dedication to the project long after his recording duties were completed showed Aoki that RM was a true partner in the creative process, not just a featured artist. This experience cemented Aoki's respect for RM as a visionary leader and a consummate professional who elevated every aspect of the collaboration. And while RM's intellectual approach to the music was a revelation, the next member on our list brought a physical, raw intensity to the studio that left Aoki questioning everything he knew about vocal performance. Number 4. The obsession with precision, Jimin. When a vocalist enters the recording booth, they are stepping into one of the most exposing environments in the music industry. In a live setting, the roar of the crowd, the acoustics of the venue, and the visual spectacle of the performance can mask a multitude of minor vocal imperfections. But in the studio, standing in front of a highly sensitive condenser microphone with a dry signal pumping directly into the engineer's headphones, there is nowhere to hide. Every slight pitch fluctuation, every breath control issue, and every trace of vocal fatigue is magnified 1,000 times over. Most pop singers rely on the modern safety nets of digital editing, tools that can pitch correct, time align, and smooth out any rough edges in post-production. It's a standard practice that saves time and keeps sessions moving. Steve Aoki, having produced tracks for dozens of top-tier vocalists, was well accustomed to this efficient workflow. He expected to record a handful of solid takes with Park Jimin and then let his engineering team polish the details later. What he didn't expect was to encounter an artist who viewed these digital safety nets not as a convenience, but as a compromise he was entirely unwilling to make. Jimin brought a level of vocal perfectionism to the session that completely redefined Aoki's expectations of pop vocalists. From the moment he put on his headphones, Jimin was engaged in a relentless pursuit of a flawless performance. He didn't just want the notes to be on pitch. He wanted the timbre, the breathiness, and the emotional resonance of every single syllable to align perfectly with the sonic atmosphere of the track. Aoki watched in fascination as Jimin recorded a take that sounded absolutely stunning to everyone in the control room. The pitch was perfect, the timing was immaculate, and the emotional delivery was top tier. The engineers were ready to mark the take as complete and move to the next section. But Jimin immediately signaled from the booth, asking to hear it back. He listened with a level of intense concentration that seemed almost painful, his eyes closed as he analyzed his own voice. When the playback finished, instead of celebrating, he pointed out a microscopic flaw, a slight tremor in the tail of a note, a breath that felt a fraction of a second too loud, a transition that lacked the precise emotional warmth he wanted. He politely asked to run it again. And again. And again. This process repeated for hours, with Jimin making micro-adjustments to his vocal delivery that were so subtle, most casual listeners would never even register them. But to Jimin, these details were the difference between a good track and a masterpiece. Aoki realized that Jimin wasn't just performing, he was sculpting sound. He understood how his unique, airy high register would interact with the dense synthesizer pads and heavy electronic percussion of Aoki's production. He knew that if his voice was too sharp, it would clash with the high-end frequencies of the track, and if it was too soft, it would get buried under the bass. He was adjusting his vocal cords with the precision of a classical instrumentalist tuning his violin mid-performance. This level of control requires an immense amount of physical and mental discipline. Singing in a high register for extended periods puts a massive strain on the vocal cords, yet Jimin maintained his focus and technique without showing any signs of frustration. He approached the grueling process with a quiet, polite determination that won over the entire production staff. Between takes, he would step away from the microphone to warm up his voice, sip warm water, and mentally prepare for the next round of recordings. He never complained about the repetition or the fatigue. Instead, he treated each new take as an opportunity to find a better, more expressive way to deliver the line. Aoki was deeply moved by this display of dedication, recognizing it as the hallmark of a true craftsman. It showed that Jimin's success wasn't just the result of natural talent, but of thousands of hours of deliberate practice and an unyielding commitment to his art. He wasn't content to simply show up and sing. He wanted to push his voice to its absolute limit to deliver something honest and powerful. This perfectionism had a transformative effect on the entire studio environment. Seeing Jimin work so hard inspired the production team to double their own efforts. Aoki found himself adjusting his synth arrangements and refining his drum patterns to better complement the nuances of Jimin's vocal delivery. The session became a collaborative dialogue where the music and the vocals constantly pushed each other to higher levels of quality. Jimin's physical presence in the booth was also a source of fascination for Aoki. Even though he was recording audio, Jimin's entire body was in motion. He would physically mimic the choreography of the track, using his movements to help control his breathing and capture the correct energy for the performance. He understood that vocal production is a physical act and that the tension or relaxation of the body directly affects the quality of the sound. This integration of dance and song, even in the isolated environment of a recording booth, highlighted how deeply Jimin internalized the music. He wasn't just producing sound, he was embodying the rhythm and the emotion of the track. Aoki noted that this physical commitment was what gave Jimin's vocals their unique, dynamic quality, a sense of movement and life that digital editing could never replicate. The final vocal tracks were a testament to this exhausting process, possessing a warmth, clarity, and emotional depth that elevated the entire collaboration. When the session finally wrapped, Jimin thanked every member of the studio crew individually, apologizing for taking so much time and expressing his gratitude for their patience. This display of humility and respect, coming from one of the most famous artists in the world, left a lasting impression on Aoki. It proved that for Jimin, professionalism wasn't just about technical skill, it was about how you treat the people who help you create your art. He showed that true greatness is quiet, humble, and completely dedicated to the work. Aoki's time with Jimin shattered the stereotype of the pampered pop star, revealing instead a fierce, disciplined artist who would stop at nothing to achieve his creative vision. And while Jimin's vocal precision set a new standard in the studio, the next member on our list possessed a creative intensity and a raw, unfiltered approach to songwriting that forced Aoki to completely throw out his production playbook. Number 3. The raw sonic architect Suga. In the music industry, there is a distinct boundary that usually separates the performer from the producer. Performers are the face of the music, the ones who deliver the emotional peaks, capture the audience's attention, and stand under the spotlight. Producers, on the other hand, are the architects who work in the shadows, staring at digital audio workstations, manipulating wave files, and shaping the sonic landscape. It is rare to find an artist who can inhabit both worlds with equal authority, but when Steve Aoki met Min Youngi, known as Suga, he realized he was dealing with a pure producer who happened to be a global superstar. Suga did not approach the collaboration as a singer waiting for a beat to be handed to him. He approached it as a fellow engineer looking at a blueprint, ready to dissect the structural foundation of the track. Before he became a member of BTS, Suga was an underground beatmaker in Daegu, working in cramped studios, learning the complexities of MIDI programming, and understanding how to stretch a budget to get the best possible sound. That background defined his entire approach to working with Aoki. He didn't just walk into the booth to record his rap. He sat next to Aoki at the mixing console, looking at the layout of the project file. Aoki was stunned by Suga's immediate grasp of the technical aspects of the production. He wasn't talking in vague, artistic metaphors. He was asking about the specific plugins Aoki was using, the compression ratios on the drums, and the equalization of the low-end frequencies. This technical fluency changed the dynamic of the session instantly. Aoki was no longer just a producer guiding a client. He was engaged in a peer-to-peer technical exchange with a fellow sound designer. Suga understood how to balance the aggressive, driving energy of Aoki's electronic style with the raw, rhythmic flow of his own rap delivery. He knew that his vocals needed to function as a percussion instrument, locking into the grid of the beat with mathematical precision. He didn't need multiple warm-up takes to find the pocket of the rhythm. He had already analyzed the tempo and the swing of the track before the microphone was even turned on. His recording sessions were notoriously efficient. He would step into the booth, deliver a take with a raw, gravelly intensity, and then immediately step back out to analyze the waveform. He knew exactly how to control the distance between his mouth and the microphone to create different proximity effects, giving his voice a dark, intimate quality that cut through the bright, digital textures of Aoki's synths. If a take wasn't working, Suga didn't need the producer to tell him why. He could hear the microsecond misalignment or the slight drop in energy himself, and he would correct it on the next run with absolute precision. Aoki was deeply impressed by this self-correcting mechanism, noting that it saved hours of tedious editing. But Suga's involvement went far beyond his own vocal track. He was constantly analyzing the overall arrangement of the song, looking for ways to streamline the progression and build more effective tension. During one session, Aoki was struggling with a transition leading into a heavy drop. The build-up felt too cluttered, with too many elements competing for the listener's attention. Suga quietly pointed to the monitor, suggesting that they mute the drum patterns a bar early, leaving only a single, distorted synth pluck to carry the momentum before the bass hit. It was a classic producer's trick, using silence to create impact, but it was executed with a level of timing that only comes from years of experience behind the mixing board. Aoki tried the suggestion, and the transition immediately clicked, giving the drop a massive, explosive energy that it had previously lacked. This ability to think about the song as a cohesive whole, rather than just a showcase for his own performance, highlighted Suga's maturity as an artist. He had no ego about the work. If an idea improved the track, he embraced it. If his own vocal took away from the overall balance, he was the first to suggest cutting it back. This pragmatism is incredibly rare in an industry driven by individual brands and egos. Aoki recognized in Suga a kindred spirit, someone who was obsessed with the mechanical beauty of sound and who viewed the studio not as a stage, but as a laboratory. Suga's work ethic was legendary, and Aoki saw it firsthand. Even during the chaotic schedules of a global promotional tour, Suga carried a portable production setup with him, writing beats in hotel rooms and editing files on airplanes. He was constantly generating new ideas, refusing to let his skills rust. This relentless dedication to self-improvement was what allowed him to transition so effortlessly between the pop world of BTS and the raw, underground hip-hop of his solo project. Steve Aoki respected this duality, recognizing that Suga's artistic identity was rooted in a genuine love for the process of creation, rather than the fame that came with it. In the studio, Suga was quiet, observing the room with a sharp, analytical gaze, but when he spoke, his insights were always impactful. He didn't waste words, and he didn't waste time. He wanted the work to speak for itself. This no-nonsense attitude was refreshing for Aoki, who had spent decades navigating the hyperbole of the music industry. With Suga, everything was transparent, professional, and focused on the search for the perfect sound. Their collaboration was built on a mutual understanding of the technical details that go into making a hit, and it resulted in a track that felt both cohesive and groundbreaking. Suga proved that a global pop icon could possess the technical soul of an underground engineer, bridging the gap between mainstream success and artistic credibility. His contribution to the project was fundamental, shaping the very texture of the sound. And yet, while Suga's analytical producer mindset provided the structural backbone of the collaboration, the next member on our list brought a visual and emotional charisma to the recording booth that forced Aoki to completely rethink how a performer interacts with a microphone. Number 2. The cinematic vocal presence, V. In the landscape of modern pop and electronic music, the high-tenor voice is the undisputed king. It is a sonic preference driven by the physical reality of how music is consumed in the digital age. High-pitched, bright vocals easily cut through the low-end mud of smartphone speakers, car stereos, and loud club sound systems. As a result, producers have spent decades training their ears and their software to optimize vocal tracks that sit comfortably in the upper registers. Deep, resonant baritones are historically treated with caution in electronic production because their natural frequencies reside in the exact same mid-low range as the bassline, the kick drum tail, and the warm synthesizer pads. When a producer tries to mix a deep voice over a heavy electronic beat, the result is often a muddy, sonic clash that drains the energy from the track. Steve Aoki was well aware of this challenge when he began collaborating with BTS. He knew that the group possessed a highly diverse vocal line, but he was particularly intrigued and slightly apprehensive about how he would integrate the deep, soulful baritone of Kim Taehyung, known to millions as V. V's voice is a rare instrument in the contemporary pop world, possessing a smoky, cinematic texture that feels more at home in a classic jazz club than on a festival main stage. Aoki quickly realized that to make the track work, he couldn't treat V like a standard pop vocalist. He had to adapt his production to accommodate V's unique vocal architecture. When V stepped into the recording booth, the atmosphere in the studio shifted. V didn't just begin singing the notes on the lead sheet. Instead, he approached the session like an actor analyzing a complex cinematic script. Aoki watched as V spent time discussing the emotional subtext of the song, asking about the visual imagery Aoki had in mind when constructing the beat, and exploring the mood of the lyrics. He wanted to understand the character he was portraying through his vocals. This theatrical approach to recording was a revelation to Aoki, who was accustomed to vocalists who simply focused on pitch and rhythm. Once the microphone was live, V demonstrated an extraordinary ability to manipulate the physical texture of his voice at will. He could transition from a clean, resonant chest voice to a breathy, vulnerable head voice with seamless control. Aoki was fascinated by how V used the proximity effect of the microphone to his advantage, stepping closer to the capsule to emphasize the lower, gravelly frequencies of his range, and then backing away slightly to let his falsetto breathe. He wasn't relying on digital pitch correction or artificial widening effects to make his voice sound large. He was using his own physical anatomy to create a sense of three-dimensional space within the track. Aoki realized that V's vocal style was deeply rooted in the traditions of classic soul and jazz genres where the value of a performance is measured by its emotional honesty and character rather than mathematical perfection. V played with the timing of his phrasing, deliberately dragging behind the beat to create a sense of tension and release before resolving back into the rhythm. This rhythmic elasticity, known in jazz circles as playing in the pocket, was something Aoki had rarely encountered in the rigid, gridlocked world of electronic dance music. It showed that V wasn't just matching the tempo, he was interpreting it, injecting a human soul into the digital architecture of the track. Aoki was so compelled by V's performance that he made the rare production decision to strip back several layers of mid-range synthesizers in the final mix, creating a sonic pocket specifically designed to showcase the warmth and depth of V's baritone. He realized that V's voice didn't need to compete with the production. It was a production element in its own right, carrying a weight and authority that gave the track its cinematic grounding. V's professionalism in the studio was characterized by a quiet, intense focus. While he is often perceived by the public as free-spirited and playful, his work ethic in the booth was absolute. He listened intently to Aoki's feedback, translating abstract production notes into subtle vocal adjustments in a matter of seconds. He was highly collaborative, asking the engineering team how his lower frequencies were sitting in relation to the sub-bass and suggesting minor adjustments to the vocal arrangement to ensure a more cohesive blend with the other members. He didn't rush through his takes, insisting on re-recording sections until he felt the emotional delivery matched the visual narrative he had constructed in his mind. This dedication to the narrative arc of the song, rather than just the technical execution of the notes, highlighted V's maturity as an artist. He understood that a great vocal performance is not just about hits and charts, it is about creating an emotional connection with the listener that transcends the language barrier. Aoki's experience with V challenged his assumptions about how baritone voices could be utilized in modern electronic music, showing him that with the right approach, a deep, soulful vocal could become the defining element of a high-energy track. V proved that artistic integrity and global pop appeal could coexist in the same voice, creating a performance that was both technically impressive and emotionally resonant. His quiet dedication to his craft left a lasting impact on Aoki, who saw in V a performer of rare depth and sophistication. And while V's cinematic vocal presence provided the emotional anchor of the track, the final member on our list brought a level of sheer vocal athleticism and raw, instinctual talent that left Aoki completely breathless, realizing he was witnessing a once-in-a-generation phenomenon. Number 1. The vocal athlete, Jungkook. In the vocabulary of professional recording engineers, there is a term known as vocal comping. It is the process of taking dozens of different vocal takes, slicing them into individual words or even syllables, and stitching them together to create a single ideal performance. For most pop records, this is a tedious, time-consuming task that can take days of work in post-production. Even the most talented singers in the world typically require this digital assembly line to achieve the level of polished perfection that modern listeners expect. Steve Aoki, having worked with some of the biggest names in the global music industry, was intimately familiar with this reality. He entered the studio expecting to spend hours comping vocals, adjusting pitches, and aligning timings to make the track feel seamless. But when Jungkook stepped up to the microphone, Aoki witnessed a display of vocal athleticism that completely bypassed the need for modern studio trickery. Jungkook, the youngest member and main vocalist of BTS, approached the recording session with a level of technical control that can only be described as machine-like in its precision, yet deeply human in its emotional delivery. He didn't just sing the notes, he executed them with the physical discipline of an elite athlete. From the very first take, Aoki and his engineering team were stunned. The pitch was dead center, the timing was locked into the sub-millisecond grid of the track, and the dynamic control was absolute. Most vocalists require multiple takes to warm up, find the correct tone, and adjust to the headphone mix. Jungkook, however, delivered a release-ready lead vocal on his very first attempt. But it was what he did next that truly solidified his reputation as a once-in-a-generation talent. Without needing prompting or direction from the control room, Jungkook immediately began building the vocal architecture of the song. In pop production, Backing vocals, harmonies, and ad-libs are usually mapped out by the producer and recorded one painstaking layer at a time. Jungkook, however, heard the entire vocal arrangement in his head. He stepped back to the microphone and began recording his own harmonies, shifting his pitch by thirds, fifths, and octaves with effortless accuracy. He double-tracked his own lead vocals with such precision that the two waveforms aligned almost perfectly on the screen, creating a natural chorus effect that no digital plug-in could ever replicate. He moved from recording soft, airy whispers to powerful, chest-voiced belts in a single session, adjusting his vocal placement and air control to fit the changing dynamics of Aoki's production. Aoki watched the software monitor in disbelief as Jungkook systematically laid down track after track of clean, pitch-perfect vocals, creating a massive, rich wall of sound in a fraction of the time it would take a team of professional session singers. This efficiency was not just a display of raw talent, it was the result of years of rigorous, daily practice and a deep understanding of the mechanics of the human voice. Jungkook understood how to physically compress his own voice, adjusting the shape of his mouth and the tension of his vocal cords to ensure that his vocals would cut through a heavy electronic mix without needing excessive digital processing. Aoki later remarked that the vocal stems he received from Jungkook were some of the cleanest and most professional files he had ever worked with in his entire career, requiring almost no editing or correction before the final mix. This level of technical mastery, combined with an instinctual feel for the rhythm and emotion of the music, made Jungkook a producer's dream collaborator. Yet, despite his obvious genius, Jungkook showed no signs of complacency or ego. He was his own most demanding critic. If he detected a slight imperfection in his delivery, a note that lacked the precise energy he wanted, or a transition that didn't feel completely smooth, he would insist on re-recording it, constantly pushing himself to find a better, more expressive way to interpret the line. He treated the studio not as a place to show off his status, but as a workshop where he could refine his craft. This humility and work ethic, demonstrated by the youngest member of the group, was the ultimate proof of BTS's secret professionalism. It was the final piece of the puzzle that Steve Aoki witnessed, a group of artists who, despite achieving unprecedented global fame, still approached the core of their work with the raw hunger and discipline of rookies. Aoki's decision to reveal these studio secrets was not a marketing strategy, it was an act of genuine respect from one professional to another, a recognition of the hard work that goes on behind the scenes to create global phenomena. The collaboration between Steve Aoki and BTS proved that when world-class production meets an unparalleled work ethic, the result is nothing short of legendary, setting a new standard for international musical partnerships. And as the final notes of their collaborative history fade, one cannot help but wonder what other hidden truths remain to be uncovered in the next chapter of this global musical phenomenon.